This is Abe Friedtanzer from cinemadailyus.com, and I'm so thrilled to be speaking with Rebecca Miller about She Came to Me. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm really good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can you tell me about the origin of this story and how it came to be a film?
Um, Sort of there were different points where like seeds, I guess, or pieces of the puzzle that I ended up putting together. There was a short story called She Came to Me in my collection that was originally about a writer, and then I made him into an opera composer. And the woman that he meets in a bar who kind of brings him back his creative life, I turned into a tugboat captain. And then we had a story about young lovers, which I really wanted to tell, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. And I thought, what if I interweave these two? And then there was a character of Patricia, who's um, a, uh, a a therapist with a sort of secret spiritual yearning. So, who's married to the opera composer. So I had this something that was like all these different puzzle pieces in a way of character. And then there are other things as well in the film, but it's like the film is almost constructed like a piece of music, with different melodies in it.
What's your own relationship with music and opera in particular?
Well, I really started to get into opera a few years ago because one of my kids was more and more into music and was studying music, and we went to opera together, and so I started to really think about opera and how free it is and how emotional it is, and in terms of just that you could an opera can be anything, and the stakes are never too high in opera. And I started thinking about that in relation to film, and to try and create a language that where it's not operatic, but where if opera is the high point in the movie, because we have two original operas, then sort of real life could be somewhere in that liminal space between the high point of opera and our kind of real quotidian life that we know every day. It's somewhere in between. So there's a kind of magic, almost like space that the film inhabits.
I think it also feels at times like a stage play. Was there any consideration of doing that rather than a film?
No. Although I think that eventually I think it could actually exist as a musical piece. I mean, I think it could be um, a a musical piece like an opera or a musical. But I would miss all the stuff in the water and the underwater and in the water and the boat and the aspect ratios. And for me, it was a very visual experience. So no.
And I have plenty of questions about your cast, but before we get there, let's stick with the music. Can you talk about working with Bryce Dresner and especially also with Bruce Springsteen?
Bryce Dessner and I got to start working early on. He had to compose both of the he had to compose both of the operas before we started shooting. And so I had written the librettos, and we worked very closely together to find, and he's just, I thought I was going to have to rewrite all the words, but he managed to make it make it work with the music. And I knew that the first opera had to be, I really wanted somebody who really knew how contemporary classical music is made, and it wouldn't be a pastiche or an imitation. And he's just been fantastic because he's actually a true composer of concertos and operas, as well as being a rock star in the national. So it was like a perfect combination.
What about Bruce Springsteen?
Well, I mean, that was a miracle. Bryce suggested that I had, the dream would be to have a Bruce Springsteen song in the film. I knew I wanted somebody to write a song, and I wanted Americana and timeless. And he said, well, there's one person who'd be great for that. And I knew Bruce a little bit personally, but also, and really liked him so much. But he and Patty had allowed me to use Dancing in the Dark for for Maggie's plan, and so I was able to sort of get in touch with his reps and suggest and say, look, is there a chance? And they ended up saying, well, just send the movie to them and to look at. And I really wanted Bruce and Patty to be on the song if possible. And then and so they called me back and they really loved it. And he said, well, what would you like? And I said, well, it would be amazing if you would write a song, but I know that that's very unlikely. And he said, well, let me take a little while and see what happens. And then 3 days later he had already basically written a song and sent a demo. So he was inspired to write it, which is great.
Wonderful. And where did you start with the casting process? Is there some really important roles on all the different elements of the story that you spoke about earlier?
Well, Anne Hathaway was the first person to join. Casting is such an important part of my process. And I start sometimes years ahead. Like I started looking at, visiting tugboats and doing research on tugboats in 2016. So that means that I was thinking about casting a long time ago. And I work with my casting director, Cindy Tolan. And she and I talked and talked and talked. And anyway, Annie ended up being like the perfect person, even though she was a little bit younger than I originally thought. So I rewrote, once she said she wanted to be on board, I rewrote her part a little bit for that she had her son quite young. And then, with her on board, we talked for, then COVID happened. I mean, a lot of things happened within the process, but within that time we were talking, and of course, Marissa just seemed like the perfect person. And Marissa responded very strongly and loved the part. So she was on board. And then Peter, really as a both a movie star and a character actor and just somebody with so much charm and charisma. And yet he is such a wonderful, wonderful, real actor. Seemed like, and then Joanna Kulig, who's the great Polish actress who's in Cold War, was my sort of first and only choice for Magdalena, who's Polish. And I really wanted somebody Polish. And it was, so it was amazing that she wanted to do it. And then Cindy had the idea of Brian Darcy James. And, and he was just a brilliant idea. So, and the kids were auditioned. We auditioned.
I know that the film is coming out now in theaters, but it premiered in Berlin months ago. Was there anything that surprised you a lot about audience reaction to the film?
Well, I was actually pleasantly surprised that in Berlin it worked well because, in German, the verb comes at the end. And I'm always worried about German subtitles because, like, especially if something has to carry any kind of humor, but they're really good readers over there. So they were like, whoops, there's the verb. They figured it out. And it was a great experience. I mean, being the first, the premiere film in the Berlin Film Festival was it was an honor, and it was a really fun experience overall. Yeah.
This film will appeal differently to American audiences than it might have there.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's no question that when we just played it in New York City, and at the premiere, and the audience got everything. Like you could just feel it's a very, they just were all the nuance, all the little moments, and the emotion of it, and there's no question that language makes somewhat of a difference, but yeah, so I'm excited like that it's coming out and I'll be really interested to see like which parts of the country it works in, because it kind of can work in a lot of different ways, like I don't know, like there's the kind of New York intelligentsia, but then there's the whole Catholic element to it, and there's the whole like tugboat element to it. So I mean, I don't know, it'd be really interesting.
When you mentioned earlier all your tugboat research, what was the most startling thing that you came upon in that process that we just wouldn't know about the world of tugboats?
Well, one of the really interesting thing about people who work on tugboats, is that a lot of them are, they wouldn't really fit into the world in a lot of other ways. Like not that some of them have and some of them are much more straightforward, people, but there are also people like with real pasts and really interesting pasts in that world, and stories, and interesting scars, and just like I was very taken by that world and those people. And a lot of them actually, like in the case of Katrina's boat, they live on the boat most of the time. They live on the boat. But a lot of people on the bigger corporations, like the bigger, where there's more tugs, they'll come in for 2 weeks and then they live like in, Oklahoma for 2 weeks, or in Florida for 2 weeks, or somewhere else, and they come back here. Like they're not always in New York, so they're itinerant a little bit. So I thought that was really interesting.
Curious to see what an audience of, tugboat people would think of the film, though I imagine it'd be hard to put together a screening for that specific sect.
Well, a couple of the tug people were there. The woman who ran the company were at the premiere. Who runs a company in Staten Island, and her daughter, that helped us a lot. And actually, one of their boats is the boat in the movie. They came, so I didn't get to talk to them, but I'd be really curious to see what they thought. My main thing is like I'm really into like subcultures, and of different kinds, like where there are different professions, and things that you wouldn't necessarily always like automatically know all about. And I always want to get it right. I want it to be that somebody who's from that world would actually say, oh yeah, I recognize that, that's right. And so I really hope that they thought that. I think they would, because I really tried. And then the same is, in the world of music. I really tried to get that right as well.
Wonderful. Do you have any idea of what you want to work on next after this?
Well, I have a couple of ideas. I do, and I have a script that I've worked on for a long time that maybe I'll get to do next. I have a documentary, and I don't know. It's really hard. Like, so much of it is about what I get money for next. Because you never know. Like, it's a struggle. So we'll see what happens there. But
Great. Well, for more great conversations like this, you can subscribe to the Cinema Daily West YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and good luck with this film.
thank you.